Hello and welcome to Shortcut Up CNC. Today we're going to add a couple of tips for you. It has to do with vector display. When we select a vector, it's in a magenta color, and you notice it changes to a dashed line or a dashed vector. That is your selected designation for that vector. Now, if I go ahead and go to the design and I highlight all my vectors, notice they've all changed to magenta color and it's dashed. That is designating that it is a selected set of vectors. So now we'll group those vectors. You notice the vector lines are no longer dashed. They are solid. And they are also the magenta color. The magenta color is a designated selected color for the vectors. Now, here's a point I want to get across. When you go for the selecting of vectors, ungrouping them, it shows them as a dashed individual vectors. They're no longer grouped. I can actually select each one and it doesn't select the whole group. And it's not a solid color vector, I should say. And of course, again, magenta is the default color for the selection of any vector. So that is one point, which is when you group, they change to a solid vector and it's same color, magenta. But grouping is the same color as whatever you can also probably change that in the options settings. The default color, nope, evidently not. The default color for selecting vectors cannot be changed in the options. That is set by the program. So you want to try to avoid using any other colors. This is the second tip. If you use the same color on the vector, when I ungroup this, it's all magenta. Okay, but also when I click out in the outside area, now it's showing the vectors in the magenta color. Now that can be confusing now because that can also tell me that those vectors may be grouped because it's a solid vectors. It there's where the confusion can be made. So you want to see these are actually individual vectors. The reason they're solid in the magenta color is because of the color of the layer. So that can confuse you. You want to be able to make the layer color opposite of the designated selection color, which is magenta. And that's for anything that has to do with grouping or ungrouping your vectors. The magenta color will come into play. Here's the dash line. See, our vector colors for the layer is red. Now we've done a selection. The selection is default magenta. And when it's ungrouped, it's a dashed line. Now, if I take and hold down the shift key and I group those two vectors together, it's now going to be magenta and they're selected. If I click outside the area, they take on the color of the layer. So you can see where the colors of the layers versus the vectors can be confusing when you use the same color of on the layer versus your vector colors. So you want to be careful with that. Those are two tips: grouping, ungrouping, the designation of the color. See, they're grouped. And if I ungroup those by right clicking and going back onto the original layer, now they're ungrouped and they're dashed, but they're still in the default selected color. So if I click outside the area, now they take on the layer color. So be careful, folks, with your vectors and the vector colors, and pay attention to what is selected. The selected dashed line is a vector that's ungrouped. If it's solid, it's grouped somewhere in the project. That's it, folks. Have a good day. Thank you for watching Shark Cut Up CNC.